Today on the Mindful Space, we are talking to a neuroscientist who will help us explore the mysteries of the brain, how we can stimulate it, and what all this means for understanding how our minds work. We will also dive into common misconceptions about neurostimulation and how mindfulness practices can alter your brain. It will be interesting to talk about the science surrounding how the brain works and the potential for personal transformation. Welcome back to another episode of the Mindful Space. Today we have Toby Passman. How are you today?
I'm great, Michelle. How are you?
Great. Thank you for coming.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Let's start in the beginning. I know a lot of people might not know who you are, so can you please introduce yourself? What you do professionally, personally?
Yes. Yeah. So my background is in neurophysiology research. I'm a neurophysiology researcher. And really what got me into learning about the brain, into neuroscience and psychology, was dealing with my own mental health issues back growing up. In middle school and high school, I dealt with quite a lot of social anxiety. It was very awkward. Could have never imagined myself in the position I'm in right now
I was
talking.
going to say this. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. People nowadays have no idea, but before I was really crippled by social anxiety. I could barely talk to another dude in the class, let alone the pretty girl that I wanted to talk to. So it really caused a lot of issues within my life. And I also had, my family was affected by mental illness. I lost a family member to mental illness, and that, really impacted me too growing up. So I think that really laid the foundation of just, knowing that it was like a personal passion of mine to really work on my own problems. And I had no idea that it would then turn into, an entire career. But that's kind of what happened after I got involved in a research lab, basically at my university, and started learning all about EEG, which is basically a way to measure people's brain waves.
Okay.
It measures like the electrical rhythms that generate our thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and cognitive abilities. So I learned all about EEG research and how to actually analyze the data. And then after college, got more involved in like the clinical space, working at substance abuse centers, mental health clinics, and peak performance centers, utilizing these technologies, and also working after work, utilizing them on myself, and actually seeing that I was able to actually make a huge impact on my own social anxiety through neurofeedback training, which is one of the main modalities that I now incorporate into my work. So it was just seeing my own transformation, and then countless people from all walks of life that I've worked with benefit, themselves too.
Yeah, I mean, I want to hear more about this because I do not know half things you just said. I'm just kidding. No, but I want to understand it better, right? And I love that you were able to use it on yourself. Now, you are a double board certified neurophysiology?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay. Double board certified neurophysiology trainer. Can you explain what that means?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It's kind of a complicated title there. But basically what my job is now is I train people's brains. So my background with the research, I got a couple board certifications, one in brain mapping, which is basically a way to measure people's brainwave activity. It runs basically when you record what's called an EEG, so an electroencephalogram. This has been around since like the 1930s.
I've heard about that.
Heard about it, yeah. So brain mapping is basically a way to take that EEG data and transpose it so that you can actually visualize to see areas of the brain that are either too low, too high, or producing healthy amounts of activity. And also look at how different networks in the brain are communicating, the balance of like the left and right hemisphere. It tells us a whole lot of other metrics. So I really got deep into that space, just learning about different brainwave patterns, because there's certain signatures that you can see on people's brain maps that are indicative of anxiety, ADHD, depression, PTSD, traumatic brain injury. So all of these things, they have brainwave signatures that you can actually analyze with this technology. And then the other certification I have is in neurofeedback. And neurofeedback is basically guided based on someone's brain map. Once we're able to know which brain waves that they may have dysregulation in, say someone comes to me and they're wanting to improve their focus, oftentimes people will have deficits in a brainwave called beta. That's really important for focus and concentration. So with neurofeedback, we can actually train someone's brain to increase its production of those beta brainwaves and actually help people self-regulate and improve their focus completely naturally without any external thing.
Sounds easy, but it's not.
It's not.
How do you start about that? Like, how would you even start to train someone for that?
So-
For example, that specific, the beta one.
Right. So it all starts with an initial brain map
Mhm.
because there's a famous psychiatrist, Dr. Daniel Amen, who's basically says this, like, how do you know unless you look? Like, what do you, like psychiatry being the only medical profession that doesn't actually examine the organ in which they're looking at. So without knowing which area of someone's brain is dysregulated and which frequency someone needs either more of or less of, it's kind of more like shooting in the dark and just trying to train someone with some, protocol that might work for some people, might not work too well for other people, could actually make some people's symptoms worse. So that's why it's so critical to start with that brain map, because that gives like a roadmap to understanding each person's unique neurophysiology and basically pairing. It's not necessarily just mind reading, it's I am measuring people's minds. It's
There's
matching,
data behind it.
there's data, it's measuring the neurophysiology data and pairing that with people's subjective experiences. So if someone is telling me that they have issues with their short-term memory, and then we also see issues with the temporal lobes.
Yeah. Short-term
relatable.
memory, I was like, that sounds like me.
Yep. So, and then when
Okay.
we pair that with, the findings of, temporal lobe issues, the temporal lobes that sit right above and behind the ears are kind of the memory centers of the brain. So connecting the dots there, if someone's reporting those symptoms and they have that kind of issue seen on their brain map, then we really are able to know, okay, this is where someone needs to train their brain, and then we can go about starting to work with them.
Yeah. It sounds so fascinating to me. Can you explain to us a little bit more of your background in neuroscience?
Yeah. So I studied psychology in undergrad. I would have studied neuroscience, except at the time there was no undergraduate neuroscience program. They literally came out with one like 2 years after I graduated. I was so salty
Yeah, I was
about
gonna
that.
say.
Yeah.
Like,
But
wait.
but really actually, starting college, I started as a business major, like a lot of people not knowing what they want to do, right? And it wasn't until like I took a biopsychology class in undergrad that really piqued my curiosity in terms of like understanding how the brain works on an electrical and chemical level. So really understanding that we can actually measure people's neurobiology, that was so fascinating to me because I never excelled. I was good in school.
You're like, I never excelled. Wait.
I never excelled in science. Like science was my worst subject in
God.
high school. Like I remember like I barely even I may have failed like one of those state like standardized
Okay.
like that you do on the computer.
Yeah.
Biology, chemistry, that was not my subject.
Okay.
It wasn't until it was actually like the human biology and brain biology that I started getting really, really fascinated by. And then, kind of outside of undergrad, I got a master's in psychology just to go deeper. But really, like, I think psychology is great, but to me, it's, a bit theoretical where I like the,
Science
hard,
of it.
actual, tangible data,
Okay.
the science. So I kind of see what I do now as kind of blending together the worlds of psychology, biology, human physiology, all into one. And that was like the research lab that I worked at. It was a combination of people with all of those different backgrounds.
Oh my God. Yeah. And you're able to combine all three, I feel, especially nowadays.
Yeah,
I think it's more talkable, more acceptable too. Doesn't have to be just one thing, right?
right. There's lots of like
Integration.
cross-disciplinary integration. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you explain briefly the world of neurostimulation?
Yes. So neurostimulation, it sounds a lot scarier than it is when people hear, okay, we're going to pass an electrical current through their brain. It kind of sounds a little bit scary, right?
Sketchy.
Sketchy. Yeah. People think like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest back like the 1950s, 60s, like the electroconvulsive therapy, which crazy enough, they actually still use up to this day for like cases of really severe treatment resistant depression. Comes with a slew of side effects, but it is effective in cases when people have tried all sorts of other things that haven't worked. But really, neurostimulation has evolved much further than those sort of elementary basics. So, for instance, just to give you some reference, like the neurostimulation equipment that I use today that's commonly used is usually somewhere between 1 to 2 milliamps of electricity, the current. Now, to give you some reference, like electroconvulsive therapy uses 600 to 700 milliamps. So it's like completely
It's nothing.
resetting the brain. Like it's major. Whereas this is just a mild, electrical stimulation.
Shock.
Rather than like a crazy shock. It's more like entraining the brain.
Okay.
To basically, there's a lot of ways to entrain the brain that we can get into. But one way is with neurostimulation. So you can actually teach people's brains, for instance, like we talked about those beta brain waves that are really important for focus. You can actually run a neurostimulation protocol where the stimulation is going, say, at 20 cycles per second, 20 hertz, which is that correlates to a beta brainwave rhythm because beta is between like 13 to 30 cycles per second. So you can actually do a neurostimulation protocol that can then basically entrain someone's brainwaves to create those that they're lacking, to create more. And neurostimulation also does some really cool things in terms of increasing neuroplasticity. It actually
That
drives.
Makes sense. You were talking about that. I was like neuroplasticity.
Neuroplasticity. So it causes calcium and sodium ion surges in the brain, which actually drives neurogenesis. So helping the brain create new neurons and new connections amongst those cells, which is a super cool effect that you can get from that. They found that people with higher rates of neurogenesis have less depression, less anxiety, overall better mental health and well-being. So it's a great modality that's a really powerful tool that I think not many people have heard about. And it's not used nearly as much as neurofeedback, which is the main training modality that I work with currently. But at the same time,
still being used.
Yeah, it's still a very, very powerful one.
What benefits? Well, we already talked about the benefits of neurostimulation. Can you explain what it would like? What does it entail? What would it look like? I come in, do my brain map.
Yeah, we would do your brain map.
Missing some beta there.
Yes. So we would know with neurostimulation, basically there's an anode and a cathode. So the anode is the positively charged electrode. So wherever we place that, the area of the brain is going to get stimulated. There's going to be more blood flow and oxygen is going to flow to that specific area. So if we saw underactivity in your brain map at a specific location, we could place the anode at that area. Whereas if we saw overactivity, we could place the cathode at that area. So the cathode's the negatively charged electrode. It's actually going to inhibit brain activity wherever you place it. So it increases the production of GABA, our main inhibitory neurotransmitter. GABA is what alcohol acts on. Different sedatives like benzos act on GABA to really help quiet and calm brain activity. So you can actually do that with neurostimulation. Once you know the areas of the brain that are too active, you can calm them down. Areas that are not active enough, you can help increase their activity.
So in regards to mental health and what benefits it can bring, that would be one of them, right?
Exactly. There's research on anxiety, depression, PTSD. With neurostimulation, they've looked at traumatic brain injuries. I mean, really across the board, there's a lot of cool studies too, just in terms of general cognitive enhancement. They found like specific montages, which is basically the placement of where you put like the anode and cathode. So in research that they've measured, where you place the anode, where you place the cathode, they've been able to increase like present moment awareness, increase insight and creative like insight, as well as actually improve mathematical abilities. So there's all sorts of like really cool stuff you can do with it.
That sounds cool.
Yeah, it's super cool. Yeah, so you basically have, in terms of fully answering your question, what it would actually look like, I'd basically place, it's kind of odd that there's the unit that I work with, you basically, there's like a couple electrodes that you actually need to soak them in a saltwater solution for them to actually
water
conduct.
And electricity.
Yeah, right. It doesn't usually, they don't usually play well, right?
The stigma surrounding it, the way you do it.
Yeah, right. Maybe so. Yeah, the salt water basically just enables the electrodes to actually conduct the electrical current, but it basically dump them in the salt water, squeeze it out, and then put the electrodes on your head, and then put a cap over your head just to kind of put everything in place. And then you would start feeling, when we turn the machine on, you would start feeling kind of a mild tingling or even itching sensation. So it's not painful,
It's not like
but
a shock.
not a shock, but you do definitely feel it.
Feel it. Okay.
Yeah. So,
Great.
yeah.
I said, now I want to try it. Oh my God. And then you say you mainly work with neurofeedback.
Yeah. So,
yeah, explain a little bit more.
Yeah. So neurofeedback basically, is able to record people's brainwaves in the same way that the brain scan, like the brain map, is able to do that. But then neurofeedback is also able to provide direct feedback on how someone's brain is doing.
Okay.
For instance, if we keep along with that analogy or example of someone wanting to improve their focus and increase their beta brainwaves, we could actually program in our computer on the system to help reward someone's brain when they get into that focused state. So how that reward would look is you'd be playing some kind of game, like kind of a video game on a phone or tablet, or even like watching something on Netflix. Take the game, for example, you'd be playing some video game. I like this one that's like a UFO where you're trying to get the UFO to like fly upwards, and you're trying to get the wind noise to get louder. So basically, whenever your brain gets into the desired brainwave pattern, for instance, it starts producing more of those beta waves, you get into a really focused, highly concentrated state, then you would see the UFO start to fly up and the sound would get louder. So through the use of both audio and visual feedback, it can actually encourage your brain to produce more of those healthy brain waves. And it can also do the reverse if we wanted to teach your brain, say, for example, oftentimes people with anxiety, trouble sleeping, OCD,
just thinking about like the opposite.
Yeah, they oftentimes
like you're too focused.
Literally, and it often manifests as too much beta activity, particularly high beta, which is like quote unquote the bad beta. So when people have that pattern, we would actually teach their brain to produce less of that beta brainwave activity. So whenever their brain got into that beta state, they would actually lose the reward. So the UFO would not fly high. You would not hear the sound.
Stay very low.
Yes, yes. So you can directly help encourage the brain. You can reward the brain when it's getting into its desired state. And you can kind of take that reward away when the brain deviates and starts producing unhealthy rhythms.
How many times do you have to do this for you to see effect, or what's recommended?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Sometimes from the first neurofeedback session, people might feel a little bit calmer, a little more relaxed. Really, when it comes to like 3 to 5 sessions, people really start to notice the benefits. But typical neurofeedback protocols, I recommend anywhere, and most clinicians recommend anywhere between 20 to 40, sometimes even 60 neurofeedback sessions to see really long-lasting, significant changes, both in someone's brain map, along with just their subjective experience. Because what we're doing is basically helping the brain create these new neural pathways. And those pathways need to be repetitively trained. Like I always use the example or analogy of exercise, where if you go to the gym, if you're not normally working out and you go to the gym one time and you lift, it doesn't matter how hard you go, no matter how hard you train, you're not going to wake up the next day with a perfect physique. So you wish. And that's what a lot of people wish with mental health. That's why like people pop pills and it gives them an instant effect. Neurofeedback is not that way at all. It's a more subtle, gradual training, but it can really correct the underlying problems that are driving people to self-medicate or to use different prescription medications to cover up those problems. Because if you can get to the underlying electrophysiological problems, you can really kind of get to the very root cause of a lot of people's issues.
What do you see the most in regards to mental health diagnosis being treated? Like what is it good for one thing and not the other, or it could really work across? Like what do you see the most with your clients?
Yeah, with clients right now with my business Neuroflex, I mainly work with like executives and entrepreneurs who are looking to optimize their productivity, minimize distraction. A lot of them have ADD, a lot of them have anxiety. I'm not specifically doing a treatment because my focus with my company is basically peak performance. So kind of that biohacking space, even though there is plenty of research that, and I've used all these things to treat different conditions, but I am not a licensed clinician myself. And the reason being is my interest was, I was a biohacker myself, and I was mainly interested in that, wellness, peak performance application of these technologies. So I can't specifically claim to be treating someone's anxiety or their depression, even though the technology has tons of research.
But you see that they correlate.
Absolutely.
Start seeing the people.
Yes.
Makes sense. Can you explain a little bit more into depth how brain mapping works, and what is it used for? You kind of already said what it's used for, but just more into depth for the people that have no idea, that have never seen this.
Of course. Yeah. So basically what people need to understand is their brain communicates both on a chemical and electrical level. In order to accurately measure the chemicals that are in your brain, we would have to do a spinal tap, which is not going to be an easy service to market. I don't think anyone's going to want a spinal tap. So for that reason, the majority of research has been done utilizing or basically measuring the brainwave activity, measuring the electrical rhythms that the brain uses to communicate with itself. So through the use of this technology, we're able to actually pick up those tiny electrical signals that emanate from the brain up to the surface of the scalp. So with the use of this, it's like a swim cap looking device, this EEG cap that sits on someone's head. I squirt some gel into each of the little electrode sites, wiggle it around, make sure that we have a good signal on my computer, make sure that everything looks good, and then we're able to actually measure at 19 different areas of the brain to see those electrical rhythms. So we're able to evaluate the 5 major brainwaves, which are delta, theta, alpha, beta, and gamma, which some listeners may have heard about, some may not.
Yeah, some of them are more familiar than others.
Yeah. People talk a lot more about the neurotransmitters, right? Everyone knows about serotonin and dopamine.
Yes.
But these brainwaves are equally as important. So basically, going down the different lists of brainwaves, you have delta waves that are mainly seen in really deep restorative sleep. When someone's completely unconscious, your brain is producing a lot of delta. Theta is a little bit faster. It's still a slow brainwave that's seen mainly when people are in deep states of relaxation, almost like a trance, think deep meditation, hypnosis. It's kind of that, almost that subconscious space where you're just kind of in a it's kind of also
transient state.
Yeah, it's also kind of a drowsy state, an inattentive state. So oftentimes people with ADHD will have an overproduction of theta brainwaves, which prevents them from, being able to properly focus. And then we have in the middle, going from the slowest to fastest in the middle, are alpha brainwaves. So alpha waves are really involved in flow states. When I'm sure you have this experience, I feel like right now I'm in a flow state. I feel like I'm just completely immersed in a conversation with you. I'm not thinking about what I'm going to say. I'm not thinking about what I'm going to have for dinner this evening. I'm just completely in the present moment. So the brain is normally producing a lot of beta brain waves. That's kind of our normal alert, awake kind of default state. And that's kind of like that monkey mind state where we have all these thoughts going through our heads. We're thinking about all sorts of crazy things. So when we get into flow states, our brain basically slows down its electrical signaling. So we start producing more alpha and even theta waves. So those brain waves are all really important. Talked about beta a little bit. Beta's one that's oftentimes one of the most common findings that I'll see in someone's brain map report is an overproduction of those high bad beta brain waves. And that's indicative of things like OCD, anxiety, PTSD, overthinking, ruminations. I try to
all this time saying under, I was like, well, maybe
yeah. So that's, beta, it has its functions, but oftentimes people have it to the extreme, and that's what's causing a lot of problems. And then the last of the brainwaves, the fastest, is one called gamma. And to me, gamma's one of the most interesting ones because they've done a series of studies at the University of Wisconsin. Dr. Richard Davidson, a researcher, basically looked at how Tibetan monks, looked at the brainwave patterns of monks to see how those changed as the result of long-term meditation. And they actually found that increased gamma waves were a common signature that was frequently seen when people had been meditating for super long periods of time. So,
We lost power.
oh, wow.
When?
Cameras are still recording. However, the ATEM reconnected and changed all the settings.
Oh, no.
Did this just happen, or we've been talking?
No, I thought I heard like a fuck like 30 seconds ago. I was like, I just tried
I
to.
zoom out. It's like,
You're in a flow state.
I have
You-
a
you're-
child, so I've learned to just, unless it's like an emergency scream, I like don't.
Right. How old's your kid?
13.
13.
Mhm.
Okay.
So I have 13 years of training of ignoring.
Mm-hmm.
Mom. And I'm like, and my friend will be like, he's calling you. I was like, oh, what happened? It's like, it's not emergency. He calls me all the time. Trust me, he'll come get me if it's emergency. Oh,
I like these coasters. They're cool.
cute. Oh, low battery. I love all this conversation. I was reading a book about all these neuro things. So, like,
Yeah.
I was never good at chemistry or physics or anything
Let's
like
keep
that.
it going.
But this book reminded me to tell you the name. It like breaks it down very. It's very easy to read.
Okay. I'm curious. Yeah. Please.
And it talks about mental health and neurotransmitters and how like certain diseases like Alzheimer's, and
Yeah.
so I like find myself reading it and I listened to you and I was like, oh, would have thought I'm like all interested into this bio stuff.
Right. Right.
I'm more of the psychology person.
Gotcha.
I'm the opposite of you, but like I just find it so interesting how it just all works together. Like you're so like I love data too, so if I have data, I can like do my job better too.
Right. I honestly, yeah, I honestly think it's a disservice that people like are not kind of forced to study both psychology and biology if they're in like the mental health or neuroscience space, because like how do you understand someone's mental health without understanding how their brain works on a biological
we see like
level?
one bio class,
Right.
but we don't go deep into neurotransmitters and all that stuff. Just like
Right.
one class overall, and yeah, it's not enough.
Right.
It's definitely not. I would never go out and talk.
Right.
Like you're talking about neurotransmitters.
Right.
I'll be like, no.
So gamma waves are basically the fastest of our brain waves. They're a really fascinating brainwave to me because they're frequently seen elevated in meditation, breathwork, psychedelics. All of these modalities, they frequently really increase gamma waves. And that's both in research, along with me actually going and putting these EEG caps on people while they're doing breathwork, meditation. So gamma waves. So gamma is the fastest of the brain waves that I'm able to assess. And gamma waves are frequently associated with increased neuroplasticity, where the brain is able to change and reorganize itself. So psychedelics, meditation, breathwork, all these modalities have been shown to frequently increase gamma wave production, and they kind of increase people's awareness and expand consciousness. So a really interesting series of studies was conducted by the University of Wisconsin professor Richard Davidson, who basically looked at the brainwave patterns in advanced like Tibetan monks, people who had been meditating hours a day for years on end, basically looking at how are their brains different from, Joe Blow who does not meditate for hours a day, like most of us. So one of the most common things that they kept seeing with these meditators was greatly increased power of their gamma brainwaves. So researchers kind of linked that to that increased present moment awareness and expanded consciousness that meditators frequently have. And that strength of their gamma waves is both dependent on, how long someone's meditated and then how, the repetition. So it's just like with anything and all these other types of brain waves, when you're doing any sort of training, where you're repetitively reinforcing a brainwave, your brain gets better and better at creating it. So with all these brainwaves that I just talked about, what's really important for people to understand is that none of the brainwaves are good or bad per se. They all serve important functions. It's kind of like if you're to get lab work, you want everything in the optimal range. If there's labs that are too low, that causes problems. Also, if you're too high in something, that can also cause problems. So same deal with when we're evaluating someone's brainwaves, we want to see a nice, healthy balance where people are in the optimal range of each brainwave. But if someone has too little or too much of a brainwave, that's when people start experiencing issues.
That's when you step in.
That's where I come in.
Let me help you.
Yes, exactly.
How can research-backed neuroscience tools be used to improve cognitive functioning?
Yeah. So I think we're in a really exciting time where we have people like Andrew Huberman, who has really been able to take the cutting edge neuroscience and actually make it accessible to lay people who are just interested in learning about it. Because previously, I think there's so many researchers who are doing really cool things who I love, geeking out and talking to, but they really are not able to commute. They're such experts in their specific subject matter that they've been studying for 30 years. They know how to have these high level conversations with other researchers. They don't know how to communicate that science in a way that actually makes sense to you or I.
The Gen Zs or millennials.
Right. So, and that's really like where I see like my role is like really trying to help bridge that gap between, where the research is and then how, the application of that research to actually help people live better lives based on this neuroscience research. Because for the most part, I mean, had you ever heard about brain mapping or neurofeedback prior to us having this conversation?
Only because I do the podcast and I do my research and I'm in mental health.
Because you're in mental health.
Yeah. But if I were to speak to a friend that has nothing to do with it,
they have no idea.
What?
They have no idea.
They would just go back to their bio class from high school.
Yep.
Like, I think I learned about this, but I don't really remember.
Right.
Yeah.
And what's crazy is like people oftentimes, like I'll speak to client or prospective clients and they'll be like, oh, is this like some new experimental technology? And I'm like, no, this has actually been around for decades and decades. I did not invent any of this stuff. Like it's simply that I'm taking these modalities and bringing them to the biohacking wellness community with my company. But it's nothing new. And that's, it's just, I guess, bad marketing on the part of these different neurofeedback and brain mapping companies. Because
maybe there wasn't any people to market for, I feel like now people are just more interested.
People are more
wellness,
open.
Mental health, more open, like biohacking and all that stuff.
And they see how damaging, pharmaceuticals, things like Adderall, antidepressants, they see the problems that are caused by taking these medications. And people are really wanting a better alternative, a natural solution. And I think that's, oftentimes when people start seeing me to do neurofeedback, they've tried all these different things. They've gone through, they've gone through the Western medicine, psychiatric kind of model and have just struck out with different medications. And, they're just really looking to either get off of those medications or really just be able to get the benefits of your proposed benefits of the medication, such as better mood or better focus without having to like take something externally. So
I completely agree. I think nowadays people just want a more holistic approach, or like you said, not everything's for everyone, right? So someone might take Adderall and it might be great and it worked for you, but then for others it just had more consequences then.
Right.
So
I mean, even when it works for someone though, it's still
there's still side effects.
There's still side effects. Like there's Tim Ferriss talks about there not being any biological free lunch when it comes to taking a drug. Like no matter what drug it is, there's always going to be a downstream effect, unintended effect. So with Adderall, most people take it, and I mean, I've taken Adderall and I feel great. I mean, I feel euphoric. I feel like I'm high, but over time, because Adderall is basically causing this dump of the neurotransmitters that you have in your brain. It's causing your brain to dump out all of the stored up dopamine and norepinephrine.
Yeah. So super focused.
So you're super focused. But then what happens when you run it, when that wears off, you crash because your brain has dumped out. You don't have any neurotransmitter left to have motivation. So you're artificially kind of, increasing your ability to focus in the moment, but you're taking away your long-term ability to focus. And I think that's something we're seeing, is long-term usage of different medications. It starts wearing out brain receptor sites. So people can actually have worse symptoms from long-term use of these medications than they even had prior to getting treated, which is really unfortunate because most people aren't aware.
Yeah, they're not, or they're just thinking of the now.
Yeah,
Like, this will fix my problem now.
exactly.
20, 40 years.
Yeah, yeah. And
Your
it's like,
dosage goes from 5 to 50 milligrams.
yeah. And I mean, I get it. It's like, easier to like market liposuction that's going to take away people's fat, just from
And
one
work out every day.
surgery. Yeah, than working out people like convenience and ease. I get it. But I think just like anything in life that's really worth having, such as really good brain health, it does take work. I'm not ever telling people that they're going to just be able to throw on these electrodes a few times and just
It'll be
have
fixed,
great,
yeah.
yeah, they're not, I'm a huge fan of, alongside the training that we do with neurofeedback or neurostimulation, I'm also giving people the tools of like brain healthy nutrition, different lifestyle interventions such as getting morning sunlight, helping set their circadian rhythm, increases production of serotonin and dopamine, so helping
Yeah.
people have an elevated mood and focus, along with just talking about general like sleep hygiene, basic stuff that
Yeah.
really is like the foundation. Like we've talked all about this, all of these cool neurotechnologies,
Yeah.
but really, if people are not getting good quality sleep, if they're not eating a healthy diet, if they're not spending time outside in nature, it's going to be pretty difficult to have, good brain health. And the training is only going to be able to do so much. You can't, they say in the workout community how you can't out-train a bad diet.
Okay.
And I would apply that same logic. You can't,
Yeah.
out-train in terms of the brain. You can't out-train when someone's not getting good sleep. They're getting 2 hours of sleep at night and eating Cheetos.
Yeah.
They're not going to get the same results from neurofeedback as someone who's really dialed in.
I'm
with all
laughing
this.
because my trainer would be like, "Told you." I'd be like, "So what exercise do I need to do to burn this?" And they're like, "Well, if you keep eating how you're eating, nothing's
Good
gonna
luck.
happen." I'm like, "Okay, it's
Yeah.
I don't need to be that skinny. It's fine. I don't need to be that." How can optimizing one's neurophysiology impact their mindfulness or their spiritual awareness?
Yeah. It's a great question. I think that when we have a more balanced, neurophysiology, we just feel more connected, whether that's to other people, to other, to ourselves, just like in a spiritual sense, because there's actually areas of the brain that govern our sense of spirituality, like the temporal lobes that sit above and behind the ears. There's actually a really interesting phenomena that occurs with a specific type of epilepsy called temporal lobe epilepsy, where those parts of the brain just start firing in really disconnected ways, and someone starts having these epileptic fits. They actually experience like hyper religiosity and have these like grand, like spiritual sort of experiences.
Okay.
So it sort of shows that like there very much is a biological brain basis for spirituality. So I think when people have, healthy brain waves, they're more able to experience that spiritual connection. And then also like all these modalities such as breath work and meditation that are frequently used in the spiritual community, they are now all the neuroscience is coming in to support what people have been doing with meditation and yoga and mindfulness. There's real tangible benefits that can actually now be seen and researched, even though people obviously
I've been doing
knew.
it for a while.
Yeah, they knew without needing that research, but now the research coming in, to back all that stuff. So I think I'm a big fan of, doing things that are scientifically validated almost to a fault. At one point, I was very scientifically minded growing up. And if there was not a research study telling me I should do something, I wouldn't do it.
Even bother.
I wouldn't even bother. And now I'm like a little more balanced.
You're like,
Probably-
now I'm a little bit.
Probably after taking mushrooms a few times, I like that part of
It
my
opened
brain
your
started
mind.
opening up. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I think that I think you can't really separate the spirituality with the science. And that's really one of my goals is to kind of fuse those two worlds together, because you can actually, with, brain mapping, you can measure what happens to, with people during these spiritual transcendental states.
What kind of mindfulness practice do you use on a day-to-day? Or what would you
Yeah,
recommend someone that's looking to, heighten those, was it beta or
right.
gamma?
Yeah, so with meditation, usually like
Okay.
alpha waves is
Okay.
like, or
Yeah.
theta waves will start to increase. So helping the mind like kind of slow down. I really like this technique. It's from, probably butchering the pronunciation. It's like Kirtan Kriya, a
Okay.
form of yoga. But they basically put people in brain scanners as they were doing this specific meditation. And they were basically evaluating to see how their brain changed. So the meditation is one where you're connecting your fingers as you're saying the words sa, ta, na. Oh, I butchered it. It's the pinky first. Sa, ta, na, ma.
Okay.
And you keep repeating that. So it's basically like kind of developing that like kind of hand-eye
Mm-hmm.
coordination, verbal, connecting that all. And they've actually shown in fMRI scanners that it enhances blood flow to the prefrontal cortex, which is an area of the brain that's super important for
Yeah.
executive functioning, decision making, focus, and just emotional regulation. And it also quiets down activity in an area of the brain called the amygdala, which is our fear center. It generates that very frightened, fight or flight sort of
Firefly.
response. So there's other meditation techniques that
Yeah.
absolutely probably do the same thing. I just like this
You like
specific
that
one
one?
again with what we were just talking about because there's the neuroscience research behind it.
Okay. Oh,
Um,
of
but
course.
yeah,
Why would you try something that's not backed up by science?
I mean, there's probably things that haven't yet been backed up that definitely work. But
Hmm.
I mean, also another thing I can think of breath work that I really like is what's called box breathing, where you breathe in like for a count of 4, you hold for a
Yeah.
count of 4, and then breathe out for a count of 6,
And then you
hold for a
keep
count of
going,
2.
right?
You keep
Eight,
going.
10.
With
Or
this
is there
one,
a
it's
different
just like
one?
the 4 4 6 2. I'm sure there's tons of
There's so many.
variations. With the main importance though that I have read about in terms of you want your out breath to be longer than
Longer.
your in breath, and that really signals that really
It's hard
activates the
sometimes.
parasympathetic.
I mean, at least for me. Because then you're
Yeah,
like, it's all out. You're still like,
right.
it's like almost holding it.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you can do a lot, with breath work. Also in
Oh,
terms of
of course.
like holotropic breathing
Hmm.
or different like hyperoxygenation breathing, like the Wim Hof method, where
Yeah.
people are doing that kind of
I've gotten dizzy
hyperventilation
doing breath work. Like, yes,
because
it's definitely,
it's
yes.
changing your blood oxygenation levels, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I was just listening to an interview, Gary Brecka, who's like the leader of 10X Health. He was talking all about, the actually it's beneficial to have those symptoms such as like the dizziness or
Yeah.
tingling, like that's actually indicating that there's these changes in our blood oxygen levels, which is sort of like we're getting the training in the same way our muscles are going to be
Okay.
sore after lifting weights or while
Hmm.
we're lifting they get tired.
Yeah.
It's like with breath work, that's kind of like an
So it's
effect that
working.
it's working. Yeah.
You almost kind of panic a little bit, but yes, if you keep
I,
going, then the less dizzy, you get less dizzy.
yes, I get what you mean because it sort of resembles like a panic attack. I think for a lot of people,
Yeah.
um, I used to have panic attacks like back in high school or back in college. I started having them, and that type of breath work actually like reminds me very much of like the physical
Mhm.
sensation of a panic attack, and I've heard that from other people too.
Yeah. And
So,
then it's like you have control. So the first thing that crosses your mind is like, stop. Like, stop
right.
doing it. So you're almost like fighting it. Like, if I keep doing this, I'm going to keep getting more dizzy. And then if I stop, it's like, you're done.
And
So,
same deal with like ice baths, right? Where it's like if you
oh,
jump in an ice bath, I don't know if you've ever, but
not a nice, no, cold plunge
okay.
is my
No cool.
maximum.
Yeah. Well, cold plunge, I
And
mean,
I'm
same,
still like, oh,
but it's like, I think it's great where it's like that you learn that mental discipline where it's like
yeah.
your body's screaming at you to get out, but you're
Oh, I stopped feeling it
exercising.
after a couple. I can stay here forever. I don't feel my body.
Right.
Let's do this.
But it's like that first 30 seconds, when you
Oh
get
my
in,
God.
like
Yeah.
your brain is screaming, get out,
Get
like we're
out.
gonna die.
Like,
But
no,
it's like
people are
being able to,
watching. Stop. Just
yeah,
kidding. Oh my God. Now, can participating in mindfulness practices alter our brain waves? I'm going to say yes. Right?
absolutely.
After all this conversation, I think I learned
Yes.
that the answer
Yes.
is yes.
Definitely so. Yeah, it
Okay.
can alter our brain waves, our neurotransmitter levels, blood flow and oxygenation to the brain. All of those things can get modified through, I'm the most familiar with like breath work and meditation. But mindfulness meditation, there's a whole center at UCLA that's devoted to studying mindfulness meditation. And, they have a lot of neuroscientists that have shown all sorts of incredible benefits, decreased levels of cortisol, our main stress hormone, it enhances our immune system, different aspects of our brain performance. So there's I think at this point, a ton of like neuroscience backed validation. Yes, research.
We're all about research
Yes.
today. How can an individual achieve optimal cognitive performance?
Yeah.
Is there such thing?
Yeah. I think there is. I mean, I think the percent, I don't know, like the percent where someone feels like, they're doing well, I think that percent can always be higher for almost everyone. I think that there's a whole fallacy surrounding like people who've watched Limitless or like, seen those movies and where they talk about, we're only using 10% of our brain.
Oh my God.
It's actually it's not at all true.
I've heard that so many times.
Yeah, the brain's very metabolically active. All sorts of different areas are constantly in use. And even like when we sleep, people think that our brain just shuts off, but actually our brain actually wakes up in a lot of ways. Like it's very metabolically active. So, in terms of like how do people reach, peak cognitive performance, I would say like going back to just those foundations, of getting really high quality sleep, getting adequate sun exposure, I think particularly in the morning is so, so important. I'm a big fan of grounding. I think there's starting to be some really good research on that. So like how I kind of combine all that and also with my exercise is just going to the beach. Everyone loves how they feel going to the beach, right? After a long day at the beach, it's like you're getting the sun, you're getting the negative ions from the air, you're getting the immersion in water. Water, they found there's started to be studies that actually validate like the just being in or even looking at water can greatly reduce anxiety and depression. So, kind of combining all of those different, I'm a big fan of like stacking, stacking together as many things. So with going to the beach, you're getting all of those benefits. And if you're, go for a brisk walk, you're also getting your exercise. So really just laying the foundations for solid brain health are so important before you start venturing off into, nootropics or neurofeedback.
Okay.
I think
start with the basics.
Start with the basics, no matter who you are. I think also like nutrition, I'm a big believer in, potentially the ketogenic diet. I don't think everyone has to go that far necessarily, but having good, healthy fats, like eating healthy fats in your diet is so essential to optimal brain performance because our brain's actually composed mainly of fat. It's actually 60 to 70% fat and like the myelin sheaths.
That's so heavy.
Yeah. But no, seriously, like we were told for so long that fat is terrible for us.
Yes.
The
there's
standard
good
American
fat
diet.
There's bad.
Yes, exactly. Trans fat is like banned by the government. Like don't eat trans fat. Like even the government says it, don't eat it. Even though they've approved all sorts of other stuff we shouldn't be eating. It's that bad that we should not be eating. But good, healthy fats such as avocados, olive oil, coconut oil, MCTs, like medium chain triglycerides, all of these things, grass-fed butter, all these things are so, so good for our brains. And I really noticed for myself when I started transitioning into a diet where I was just adding more healthy fats. I was just pouring more olive oil on my veggies and adding butter to my rice. Like I noticed like my brain really did wake up. And I talked to a lot of clients who are that same way when they haven't been eating those good high quality fats. They really do feel a significant boost in their cognition. So I'm a big fan of those healthy fats and then also fasting. I think I'm sure you probably talked to Ben about both the fats and fasting when he came on.
Yes, we did. I do some fasting myself. We're just talking about it. I do the regular 16 hours.
Yep.
At least Monday through Friday.
Yep.
I can't say I do it on the weekends.
Yeah. You got to give yourself a little break. But it's great for the brain, giving your brain that break from constantly consuming food. Because actually, neuroscientists have actually started to call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes because there's such a strong correlation to elevated blood sugar levels and developing neurodegenerative conditions
Yeah.
such as Alzheimer's. And even just, in the short run, when people have elevated blood sugar or just glucose spikes that occur, when we're constantly eating a lot of carbs and our blood sugar is just going up and down, there's actually a lot of problems that people can experience, like on a mental health basis. Increased anxiety, depression, mood swings can worsen, mainly just like energy levels where you just start forgetting words and you're just, not really
Yeah.
cognitively sharp.
I noticed the energy levels. Like when I
Energy.
started doing the fasting, it wasn't for dieting. It was
Right.
because I would eat and just like crash and then eat again.
Right.
And then I was like, all right, I can't wake up and just be hungry and then be down. And so
Exactly.
that's why I did it. That's why I keep doing it.
Yeah. And I mean, I also started for a reason besides weight loss. I was a skinny guy growing up, so I didn't need to lose weight,
Yeah.
but I was really just looking to, improve my cognitive performance. So when I got started with fasting, I think probably like freshman year of college, I started playing around with it and actually noticed that, when I, instead of, I just skipped breakfast and had a black coffee or maybe added some exogenous ketones like MCT oil, or I also was a big fan of like bulletproof coffee, where you're blending together your butter with
Oh
the
my God.
MCTs with coffee, which
I've heard about it.
yeah, it sort of supercharges your ketone levels because coffee helps your brain kick up its ketone production. So ketones are basically where your brain is burning fat for fuel instead of carbohydrate or instead of sugar. And ketones are actually a much more fuel efficient source of energy for the brain. So when you're either fasting or you're eating lots of healthy fats, your brain's able to burn more ketones for energy rather than carbs. So those benefits, yeah, are a lot due to that.
Are there any supplements that you suggest people take maybe on a daily basis for the brain?
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely so. I think one of the best research-backed ones would be fish oil, like omega-3s,
Okay.
EPA, DHA. They have great effects just on like the cell membranes, maintaining proper neural communication, and then just looking at anxiety, depression, all sorts of different mental health conditions. They've found fish oil, not necessarily that you can just take fish oil and be cured, but
Yeah.
fish oil is something that can help no matter where someone's at, and doing different stuff. Fish oil is just a great, research-backed supplement to start with.
Okay.
I'd also say magnesium is a super important one, especially for people, those stressed out entrepreneurs and executives that I often work with who are just
Yeah.
burning the candle at both ends. Because magnesium, is a mineral that really helps combat stress. But the thing is, stress also depletes magnesium. So when we're highly stressed, we have lower levels of magnesium, which when we have lower levels of magnesium, we're actually less able to combat the stress. So it's this vicious cycle where people burn through their magnesium stores and get more and more anxious and stressed out. So oftentimes I'll recommend to people, taking dosages of magnesium that can frequently be a lot higher than just, the 2 capsules that it says to take on the bottle.
Okay. Because you're
Frequently,
constantly burning it.
yeah.
Especially if you're
And
in a, what is it, high stress
like a high
environment.
stress. Yeah, exactly. And like due to the mineral
Did you take your
depletion,
magnesium?
take your magnesium and not oxide. Magnesium oxide
Okay.
is just like, it's going to get, good for like constipation, just
Uh-huh.
passes through your system. But in order to actually get absorbed by the brain, you want like magnesium glycinate, taurinate, uh, citrate is also all right. Threonate is another really good one. So those are all very well absorbed by the brain and can actually increase levels of GABA, that main inhibitory neurotransmitter. It's the same neurotransmitter that alcohol works on. So you
Yeah.
can really help quiet down that excessive mental chatter and anxiety by taking, a good high quality, sometimes high dosage of magnesium.
Fish
Fish
oil,
oil, magnesium. What else would I include in there? There's so many.
I know. It's such a like big question.
It's
But
such a big question.
Those two would be the main ones.
Those
you'd
are
say.
a couple good ones. I'd also say creatine. Creatine's a really interesting one that people usually associate creatine with bodybuilding. But
Okay.
creatine can actually also improve our mental endurance in addition to like our physical endurance. So they've actually shown at different tests with people's memory or their ability to like focus with different cognitive tasks, creatine can actually extend that ability to focus or remember things. So creatine has some really cool brain benefits, especially if you're not eating a lot of like red meat.
Oh, okay.
You'll like vegetarians
Yeah,
likely would benefit the most from creatine supplementation since creatine's already, found in pretty high concentrations in red meat.
So if you eat a lot of red meat, would you recommend not taking it, or it doesn't hurt?
I still
It's one of those.
do. I
Okay.
still do. I just take like a low kind of standard dosage every
Okay.
day. Uh, but yeah, it's
Yeah, there's
just a
so
great.
many.
There's so many. Yeah, there's
No, but
different
those three are
nootropic.
just great recommendations. I think
Yes.
fish oil, we all hear about it, but then the other two,
Yes.
it's good to know how to.
Yes. Oh, and last one I'll add,
You're like,
vitamin
wait,
D.
one more.
Vitamin D. You got like
That
vitamin D is
one.
so much more than just a vitamin. It's a hormone.
Yes.
It acts like a hormone. So vitamin D is important for all sorts of different things in the body, but particularly for brain function. Vitamin D is a building block for cholesterol, and cholesterol is what creates all of our steroid hormones. So DHEA, testosterone, for women, estradiol, estrogen. So all of these you can't form without proper vitamin D. And a lot of us aren't getting sufficient sunlight. Luckily, we're blessed to live in South Florida where we can, even though
Yes.
most of us are working long
I know.
hours inside and still not getting that.
Yep.
But yeah, so for people who aren't, who aren't working outside all day, every day in the sun, I would frequently recommend, taking a vitamin D supplement. 5,000 IUs is a good starting point per day.
Okay.
But that's going to give your brain the ability to make these really important neurotransmitters that enable you to focus, to have a positive mood, to combat stress. So it's really giving your brain that building block so all of these other things work better.
Gotta start taking all my vitamins. That's great. That's 4 pills plus this plus that.
Oh gosh, you should see my cabinet.
Really?
Oh, it's crazy.
I
Yeah.
can imagine.
It's a little excessive, but not
Right,
everyone
let's
needs
not
to
go
go there.
there.
Yeah.
Well, I love this conversation. We can sit here and talk about vitamins in your whole cabinet, I'm sure. But I love bringing this type of content to the people because, like I said, I feel like mental health is not just talking therapy or psychotherapy. I think, a lot of people don't talk about the same way they don't talk about mental health. And now it's more talked about, but it's usually your medical, right? And then mental health. And then now it's like the brain health. Like nobody's like, well, how's your brain? Right? It's not really talked about.
Exactly.
So I love, we talked about that.
Yeah.
Brain health. Thank you.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. And I would just leave people with the message that no matter where they're at currently, your brain is capable of changing because of neuroplasticity. Your brain is constantly changing, evolving, growing new neural pathways, new connections amongst cells. So no matter where someone's at, that they're highly anxious or depressed, there's always a way to improve whatever, symptoms you may experience. And because of, the cutting edge of neuroscience that's now available, I think that we're starting to see that so many mental health issues, or really almost all mental health issues, have a very strong biological basis. There's a great book I'd recommend that all the listeners check out who are interested in mental health and, kind of the biological basis of mental health, called Brain Energy. It was written by a Harvard psychiatrist. It came out earlier this year, and it basically ties all sorts of different mental health conditions into metabolic issues within the brain. So if your mitochondria, the parts of our cells that generate energy, if those mitochondria aren't generating proper production of ATP, of cellular energy, there's that is like the biological basis of all of these different mental health conditions. So
there's a correlation to
yes. Yes.
I'm gonna buy that book.
Yes.
You got my interest at least. Well, thank you again.
Thank you so much.
And maybe you might have to bring you back talking.
I would love to anytime.